All right. So sometimes you get to learn lessons the easy way. It's pretty fantastic, really, right? You're faced with some sort of decision that needs to be made, some sort of problem that needs to be solved, whatever it is, and you make the right choice. You implement the right solution, and everything goes great. That's awesome. You've learned your lesson. As a matter of fact, it was so easy you may not have hardly realized that you learned the lesson, but you did, because next time it happens, you're not trying to figure it out, you just know the answer, so you know that you've learned the lesson. We all want to learn that way, but we've all also learned things the hard way, right? That way's not near as cool. You have the same decision or issue, but it was the wrong choice that was made, or it was the wrong solution that was implemented, and things went bad. And you don't even get to just learn those lessons from simply making the wrong choice. You get to learn those ones by dealing with the fallout, slogging through having to fix it, right? You get to have that experience. It's not wonderful, but it is effective, I suppose. But looking at the two options, we obviously would always like to learn things the easy way. One of the frustrating things to me is that it seems like in the InfoSec community especially, a lot of us are learning an awful lot of lessons the hard way. And in general, that's not necessarily bad. Like, everybody needs to forge new paths and learn new things. But the fact that many of us are learning the same lessons that other people learned, and we're still learning them the hard way, that's frustrating. It seems to come down to this kind of mentality that has stuck around since way back in the beginning of InfoSec, which is that sort of secret equals secure, or more secret equals more secure, and we kind of let that get a little too pervasive in our industry, I think. Sure, we all deal with things that benefit from some level of secrecy or discretion. We're maybe dealing with vulnerabilities or exploits that are still in the wild, or we have credentials that let us into things that not everyone should have access to. But we also have a lot of things that not only don't need to be kept secret, but shouldn't be. They are better when they're in the public, and we can all learn from them and raise the bar everywhere. And this is everything from policies and procedures that work good for us, tools that we find useful, and lessons that we've learned, both the easy way and the hard way. Sometimes it's not as much fun to talk about the lessons that you've learned the hard way. It involves something like standing up here and sharing mistakes that I've made and wrong decisions that I've made along the way that have led us to learning some of these lessons. But I think overall it's especially beneficial. Which brings me to my first obvious question, which is, who the heck am I? I'm Arent Campbell, at Arent Campbell on the Twitters for the people that care. I lead the security team for the WordPress open source project. For those that maybe know a little bit about that project or how it's structured or run, you might wonder how I'm able to sink like full-time hours into leading a team for a project that's run by a foundation that doesn't employ anyone. That's because I work for GoDaddy. I'm a GoDaddy employee. I work full-time on the WordPress project with the directive to help make WordPress better. And for the last 2 years, I've done that by trying to restructure, retool, and reorganize our security team and sort of bring our practices a little bit more up with where we actually need to be. It's a tough go. We have several interesting problems that we face that not a lot of other teams face. But it's been a really fun challenge. Now, we started the team about 8-ish years ago. I tried to look back and figure out exactly when we started it, but we didn't keep the greatest of records back then, I guess. But about 8 years ago, we started the security team by just kind of formalizing what already existed, right? We were already dealing with security vulnerabilities and stuff, but it was just kind of, there was a group of us that worked on the core software, and when security issues arose, we were the ones that took care of it. So we kind of formalized that into a team, made an email alias, security at, it kind of came out to all of us. And we had what seemed like a really obvious goal at the very beginning. Keep WordPress secure, right? That seems really obvious for the WordPress security team. But the interesting thing is that we found out fairly quickly that this didn't quite fit with the goals of the overall project. And I see some interesting faces and some shaking heads, like how can making your product secure not fit with the goals of your product? It's not that we didn't care about security, but it was a little bit more nuanced than that. WordPress's stated goal from the very beginning has been to democratize publishing, to give everyone a voice. Like, that was the goal, to give everyone some sort of platform that they could share whatever it is that they wanted to share, to give them that voice. That was kind of the guiding North Star, if you will, that we used to make all kinds of decisions around the product. What features went in, what bugs got the most attention, all kinds of stuff. It was all about giving these users a voice. It wasn't about building the perfect piece of software. It wasn't about writing the perfect code. It was about giving them this voice. Everything was very user-focused. And so we realized that our actual goal needed to be more like keeping WordPress users secure. And it seems like a tiny little change to our goal, but it turned out that this was actually a real fundamental shift in how we viewed security and how we handled basically everything as a security team. And so this is kind of the first lesson that we learned, that users are more important than software. I think as tech people, it's real easy to look at our code, look at our thing, look at our service or our product or whatever, and focus real heavily on that, and not think about that sort of last step to the users. There were a couple small things that focusing on users brought us some clarity on and simplified a little bit. Anybody that deals with distributed software has probably struggled with this a little bit. People that are on older versions of your software aren't as secure as people on the most recent version. And when we focused on securing WordPress, our solution to this, what do we do about it? Well, we release a secure version. We put it out there. We expect that users are going to make use of it. But do they? Yeah, not near as much as we wanted them to, that's for sure. So as we changed our focus to securing users, we could no longer claim that we had achieved our goals when we put the software out there that was secure. Unless those users were using it, we hadn't succeeded. We had sort of moved the finish line for ourselves. So we tried all kinds of things, upgrade campaigns, posting lots of things, social media. What we ultimately found is that the only way to get users to upgrade and use the secure version was to do it for them, which is how we ended up with automatic updates. Now, automatic updates went into WordPress 3.7, which was released 5 years ago now. So this is not a recent lesson for us, but it's one that we keep close at hand because it's become absolutely fundamental to how we do everything as a team. So it had to be pointed out so that all of you could understand sort of where I'm coming from as I push through these other things that we've struggled with and learned. One of the other tiny things that focusing on users made easier was trying to figure out whether we should backport fixes to older versions. We used to bicker about this quite a bit, quite frankly. Who loves backporting fixes to old versions of stuff? I saw 0 hands, which is exactly how our security team feels. It's a lame process, so no one wanted to do it. We have an all-volunteer team trying to force a volunteer to do a thing that they don't want to do. That's basically impossible, right? You have to somehow convince them that they want to do the thing that you need them to do. But once we decided that we were only successful if our users were secure, not just our software, we suddenly took a different look at this. Will it help keep WordPress users secure? Sure. I mean, some percentage of them, absolutely, and that percentage still matters to us. Yes, it will keep some of them secure, so we backport it. We backport all security fixes in WordPress all the way back to when automatic updates were introduced. So 5 years worth of releases. That sucks as a security team. It really does. But it is absolutely the best thing for our users. And because that's where we set the measure of success, that's what we do. Now, don't get me wrong, we are working on potential ways to try to shorten that up, maybe support only a year or 2 back, but we don't want to do it by dropping support for older versions that people are still using. Instead, we're working on figuring out ways to roll those versions forward automatically without breaking sites for people, and essentially we're working to try to wipe those versions from existence on the internet and bring people forward. It is not an easy problem to solve, but we're working on it, so maybe that'll be in my next talk. With all this, securing users is way more complex than just securing software. At least for us, it certainly was. It started to open up all kinds of other things that we needed to worry about that we had never had to worry about before, right? Most WordPress sites, as a matter of fact, probably all legitimate WordPress sites, run not just WordPress, which was previously our measure of success, but also some handful or plethora of plugins and a theme. And these things are code that's not under our direct control. But it affects the security of our users, so suddenly we have to care about it. As a security team, what could we do about that? That has been a struggle that we have been working on for a very long time. Similarly, hosts, right? WordPress is hosted on thousands of hosts all over the world, and obviously the server configurations, the network that they sit on, all of that affects the security of our users, and we have to care about it. And the third big struggle that we had is that our users' security is affected by our users. And they're terrible at keeping themselves secure online. Like, I look at this room, and I can probably be pretty sure that everyone here has a good understanding of what, like, good password practices are, right? Simple stuff. Now, whether you do it or not, that's not my problem, but you know it, you understand it. But most users don't. Like your average internet user, your average WordPress user doesn't really even understand the things that they ought to be doing. So now our security team not only had to worry about like our code and other people's code and what hosts are doing, but we also had to figure out how to try to educate our users and get them better at stuff. And that's hard. We don't even have, unlike most companies, we don't even have like direct access to our users. We don't ask for contact information before you download WordPress and use it. And we don't want to, because we want, like, our goal is to give everyone a voice, not put up roadblocks before you're allowed to have that voice. So we don't have direct access to them, so we had to get creative. We do things like run lots of conferences, more than 100 conferences a year now all over the world. We call them WordCamps. They help us educate our users about all kinds of things, including security. Meetup groups, similar thing, thousands of those all over the world. We build training materials that we supply to them. Like all these weird things that a security team wouldn't normally have to worry about, but when you're trying to focus on the people instead of the product, it makes a big difference. It's been hard, right? I mean, it's been hard because our security team has to interface with all these other groups, right? We're not conference planners, right? We can't plan 100 of these things a year. That's not what we're good at. So we've got other teams in the project now that help do a lot of that stuff, but we have to interface and work with them very regularly, and it's challenging. But we haven't given up on it because it's really important. It makes a huge difference. So towards the end, I'm going to talk about some more recent things that we've done around education and around solving these issues of other people's code and hosting. But those were more recent lessons learned, so we'll get to those in a little bit. WordPress is really old. By internet terms, we're practically ancient. But any software project that has been around for 15 years and is still actively used and developed is old. A lot has changed in 15 years, and it's brought with it some challenges. Sure, we have some old code in our code base. Our commitment to backwards compatibility has added some additional struggles to our age. But the most interesting thing about having been around for so long is going through the growth process with WordPress. And this is one of our really big challenges. Now, I don't have numbers going all the way back to the beginning. I don't think people cared how much of the internet any given CMS ran in like 2003, 2004. But in 2011, W3 Tech started trying to track it using a sampling of the top 1 million sites and extrapolating from there. Now I think they use 10 million. So the numbers are rough, but they give you a look at our growth. In 2011, they estimated that we powered about 13.1% of the internet. Now they estimate that we power around 31.9%. It's a big growth, and it's been very consistent and linear according to this graph, and it did not feel that way. I was really frustrated when I put this graph in my slides. I put in all the numbers and I looked at it, I'm like, that can't be right. So I went back through and checked them all. Sure enough, that's how the growth has been, but it's not how it felt. And I struggled back and forth, why does it look like this? And I started to realize, well, it's a percentage of the internet, and the internet's grown too over that time, right? Unfortunately, if there's anything less accurate than counting the percentage of the internet that a CMS powers, it's counting the overall size of the internet. But I took some rough numbers and plugged them in anyway. And while the numbers are probably terribly inaccurate, this graph is probably more like how it felt going through this growth process from the inside to us. And there were several points along the way that were terrible growing pains for us as a project, where we learned some pretty rough lessons. And a couple places where we should have learned lessons and didn't. In mid-2013 is when we first got a build process for WordPress, build tools. In 2013, we were powering like 19-ish% of the internet, and simple things like minimizing JavaScript files was still done manually for releases. We did not have any kind of build process. Similarly, like running unit tests on commits, that was a thing you had to do manually, which meant it was kind of technically optional, even though you weren't supposed to. But, you know, somebody would be committing something that they thought was innocuous, not a big deal. They didn't run the tests, but it was a big deal. Like, it started to become a serious struggle for us as a project that we needed to have a build process, right? We needed this kind of tooling, and we had waited too late. Like, it was causing problems. So we couldn't plan out a nice trajectory to having that. We had to sort of tear off the bandage and just do it all at once. And that was a really lame process. We had to restructure our code repositories, and all of our tools sort of relied on that. So everything from our bug tracker to our chatbots, everything had to be redone. And it was way, way worse because we had waited too late. Similarly, we had that in late 2014. We were powering, 22-ish% of the internet then, and all of our communication was done in an IRC channel on the Freenode network, WordPress-dev, and that meant everything from core development to like translations, like everything all in one channel. There was so much happening there that no one could really keep track. Teams couldn't have meetings because they were overlapping with everything else. They were having to spin up other channels that then, like, everything that they talked about was lost. And we had to make a move because it was too late, right? We moved to Slack. It's been great. It was a painful process to move, painful growing process, but it was fantastic for our project. Well, that was fun. But we should have learned from those. We should have learned the easy way by watching these other things that we've done as a project. But instead, our security team went through one of these wonderful, massively painful growth spurts at the beginning of last year. We launched our bug bounty program on HackerOne at the beginning of last year. And at that same time, we had to catch up to the reality of where we were as a project and fix what our team was doing. And we had waited until things were broken. And the big lesson, the big takeaway from this, for me, was that we should have been reassessing where we're at far more often. Had I looked at where we were as a team, 4 years ago, I would have said, you know what? Things are still working, but they're not ideal. We should be making some changes. Instead, no one did that all the way until the beginning of last year when things were just no longer working. There was too much happening, too much coming in to handle through an email alias and a list of people that distributed out to, right? It just wasn't enough. Everything was broken. We had to reorganize, we had to retool, we had to completely reimagine and change, and it was extremely difficult. And so now I have a calendar reminder that comes up every 6 months that says, hey, reassess. It's my little reminder to stop and say, okay, it's not that we were doing things wrong, because sometimes making that accusation, everybody gets real defensive right away. It's not that we were doing things wrong, but if I were to start over right now and redo all of this, how would I build it? And now, can I plot a nice, comfortable trajectory to there instead of this painful tearing off the bandage, reworking everything all at once kind of thing? If you haven't done this for your project, product, service, whatever it is that you do, your team, in the last, say, year, this should be priority one. Fix it while it's still working. Iteratively make it better. Don't wait until it's broke and fix it. That was a lesson that we could have learned the easy way, and instead we went through it the hard way, and we will never do it again. We retooled, I said. I often get asked what tools we use as a team. It's a very simple set of tools. We tried, it felt like hundreds of different new tools at the beginning of last year as we were trying to figure out what was perfect for us. But we really had to focus in on what saves us the most time and takes the littlest bit of effort to learn. Because we're working with a team of volunteers. They're volunteering their time to do this, and that means that time's absolutely our most precious resource. We are constantly struggling with getting enough people hours to do all the things that we need to do. So our tools need to be only focused on that. We use Slack It's been great. I mean, almost everybody uses that for communication. We have a few little scripts that we've written for it that let anyone in our security channel use a / command to easily spin up some sort of sub-channel. Everyone else is invited to that, and we can ad hoc invite other people to discuss specific issues. Whether it's experts on that issue, maybe the original researcher that reported it, maybe other projects. We've done some collaborative work with, Drupal, those kinds of projects where we needed to coordinate fixes, whatever it is that makes it easiest for us to solve an issue and bring in people that maybe don't need visibility into everything that we're doing or maybe don't even want it. We use Track for all of our internal bug tracking, for tracking issues, uploading patches, sharing them around, iterating on them. Some people love it. Almost everyone hates it. But for us, we kept coming back to it because the WordPress project has used it since way back at the beginning. We as a team are already very familiar with it, and it was easy for us. So while there's no way that I'm going to stand in front of you and say that Track is the absolute best bug tracking tool out there, I will say that I do think it's been best for us, and we use it. Your mileage may vary. And we use HackerOne, not just to power our bug bounty program, although it does do that. It's also our main tool for communicating with researchers and reporters that bring us stuff, and it's our first line of defense against invalid reports, of which we get many. Over the lifetime of our program on HackerOne, so for about the last 2 years, about 8% of reports have something valid to them in some way or another, which means 92% are not. Even just this morning, I got one through saying, hey, I found where I can find the source code to your project. Yeah, we're an open source project. That's kind of what we do. We helped HackerOne, I guess, flesh out some of their tools, the automated stuff that we use for filtering some of this out. But we also helped them pilot a program they call Human Augmented Signal, which basically means that a large percentage of our reports actually go through to a handful of people at HackerOne. They take a look at them, they can get rid of the spam, the obviously invalid stuff, even ask for clarification, so that the stuff that does come through to us is a higher percentage of valid, and even the invalid stuff, a lot of times there's a lot more info there, which makes it easier for us to say, okay, this is valid or it's not. That Human Augmented Signal program alone has made it so that more than 50% of the invalid reports that are submitted to our project never come through to our team, which is great because, like I said, we have a volunteer team. You give them too much trash to work through, they start finding someplace else to volunteer, But as we went through this whole process, trying out 100 new tools, getting rid of some old ones that we didn't need anymore, sort of settling in on this simple tool set, one of the things that we saw, unfortunately much to my dismay, is that tools don't fix most problems. I think that as tech people, we obviously, we're working on technology projects. We sort of have this technology-centric mindset. We think about technology to fix our problems, but it doesn't always. A good example, when we were working just off an email list, we struggled really bad with keeping our researchers and reporters in the loop. We might get something reported to us, we'd say, hey, thanks, we've got it, and next thing you know, we're all talking internally about it, about how to fix it, the complexities, other areas that it might break, and we've essentially gone silent to the researcher or reporter. We were really bad at that. And they would obviously and understandably interpret our radio silence as not caring. And so it caused a lot of strife and struggle between the people who were originally trying to help us out by reporting a thing to us and our team. And that's terrible. Like, that was obviously our bad. We shouldn't have done that. But as we were testing HackerOne, we're like, oh, this is amazing. This is so much easier for talking back and forth with these reporters. This is going to be fantastic. It's not only going to give us this bug bounty program that we wanted to put together and launch, but it's going to fix this other issue that we have of not keeping our reporters in the loop. And so we ran through this sort of beta period of like 4 to 6 months on it, and it got everybody used to the tool. Everyone on the team was familiar with it. We were ready to go, and we launched, and a lot of things about it were great, but we still struggled with keeping reporters and researchers updated. We still tended to go radio silent on them. The only difference is now we couldn't blame the tool because we actually had a good tool to do that. The problem is the tool wasn't the actual issue, so we couldn't fix the issue. For us, it turned out to be a team problem. We had built a team that was great at fixing security vulnerabilities. They understood them. They understood our code base and the complexities there and the history there. And they could fix those issues. But when it came to talking to people or communicating regularly, like, that was not our strong suit. That was not something that we were necessarily great at. So we fixed that problem by bringing on new people. People that maybe aren't that good at fixing security vulnerabilities, but are great at talking to people, can understand the security vulnerabilities enough to do that, and are good at scheduling themselves and making sure that they're keeping in touch with these researchers and reporters. We restructured the team and built the right group. And now, looking back, had I done that before we launched on HackerOne, could have fixed the problem even with the old cruddy tools. Now, it's better to have the good tools and have the root of the problem solved, sure. But as you're doing your reassessing, as you're looking at how you may want to change things, how things ought to be run, and you're planning that course forward, anytime that you're looking and saying, yes, we need to get this new tool to fix a problem, stop and say, will it really fix our problem, or are we just blaming our tools? For us, unfortunately, it was the latter. We were just blaming our tools. Now we're just seeing sort of this problem be fixed. We're still struggling with it a little bit, but we've gotten a lot better. Total honesty here. But it's because we got the right people. Having the right tool is nice, but not always the solution. Which brings me to sort of the last big lesson that I wanted to talk about. Which, I said there were 3 big things that we struggled with as we sort of shifted our focus to users. Code that wasn't in our control, plugins, themes, those kinds of things. Hosting and such that also wasn't in our control, but affected our users' security. And educating our users. 3 things that we had never worried about before, and then suddenly we did. We didn't really know how to fix them. We tried lots of different things throughout that time, trying to see what can we do inside the software that we do control. You know, we're tech people, we have tech mindsets. We see a piece of code and we're like, maybe we can fix it here. You know, maybe we can put enough safeguards in WordPress core to keep plugins from doing dangerous things. Well, I suppose you could if plugins also couldn't do anything useful or you know, any of the things that they have done to build our ecosystem. And the biggest move forward that we've made on this over the last 1.5 years has not been around technology at all. It's been around relationships. And relationships turn out to be super important in keeping our users secure. We sort of took a step back and said, all right, yeah, we've got all this stuff that's out of our control that we've said, well, it's out of our control. For years now, we've just said, well, you know, that's too bad. It sucks that that's out of our control. But what if we controlled everything? What would we do then? Let's just start there and build our own imaginary perfect world and go forward. And as you're looking at that, obviously, we would want to be able to protect our users against a lot of malicious traffic right at the network layer, right? Duh, that seems obvious. But we don't control that. But let's stop using that as a cop-out. Instead, let's go find the people that do control that, and let's convince them that they want to help us protect our users, right? We've gotten pretty good at that. That's how we get volunteers to do what we need them to do. We convince them that they want to. So that's what we did. We went out and started making connections and building relationships with other people that could help us accomplish our goals. And that's an okay thing to do. Like, your team or just you, like, you don't have to do it all. You can make connections and find other people that can help you accomplish your goals. For us, that was hosts, WAFs, and like CDNs and stuff to start with. We built relationships with companies like GoDaddy and EIG and Cloudflare, all these kinds of companies. And we spun up an official channel in our Slack that is for our security team to communicate with our contacts, their security people there. And it has been absolutely amazing. Suddenly, when there's some sort of security issue that can be mitigated at the network level, we go and we start talking to them about it, sharing about it, explaining what we're dealing with, and helping them write rules that can protect millions and millions of our users before we have ever even pushed a patch into our own code, right? If we get Cloudflare and EIG and GoDaddy, just those three alone, to block any potential issues with some security vulnerability, millions and millions, that's a massive step forward. And we've been continually pushing that out to more and more companies that can help us do that kind of thing. And it's great for them too, right? They're protecting their users. We have a huge overlap in those Venn diagrams. But it's been fantastic. Similarly, as we got further down the stack and we hit things like plugins, code that's not in our control, yeah, but what if it was? Like, what if we had direct access to those people or that code? And so we started working with the companies and people behind, at the beginning, the biggest plugins, right? There's hundreds of thousands of plugins written by at least tens of thousands of people, so certainly not all of them yet. But the biggest ones first, ones that were on, you know, 1 million or a couple million sites at least, we started interacting with them, working with them as we pushed out security fixes. If we're going to auto-update people's sites, letting all these big plugins run our patches through their unit tests and make sure we're not breaking 1 million sites that are using a thing that we didn't have any insight into, like, that's a big deal to us. And it's good for them too. So we have this mutually beneficial relationship that we've built that has not only let us do that, but it's let us help them raise the bar of security in their own code as well. We've lent some of our expertise. Hey, if our goal is to keep our users secure, and millions of our users are using this product, maybe we should help them make sure that that's really secure too. Because that's the only way to actually accomplish our goal. So we've started to lend our expertise to these groups and help raise the bar of security across as much of that plugin ecosphere as we can. This is obviously still an ongoing challenge. There are, like I said, hundreds of thousands of plugins, but it's been really cool to see sort of the bar lifting and things getting better, and even getting to see a little bit of a trickle-down effect from that in the open source ecosystem. A lot of the new plugins, a lot of the small ones, they're all inspired by or directly copying from some of these big established people. And so by making that code better, we're starting to see better practices across the board, even on new plugins that are being submitted to our directory, which is pretty fantastic. We're working on some other technological solutions around that as well. Better scanning of that directory to recognize potential security vulnerabilities, better communication with those plugin authors to fix it, but just building those relationships and making it official has been extremely useful. And when it comes to education and educating our users, sure, we had made a lot of progress with all these conferences, and we even put out training materials that and curriculum that colleges and other schools use to help train people. But we clearly still weren't reaching everyone. I mean, I think all of us know plenty of users that still need some security education. And now we're starting to be able to do even more of that through these relationships that we've built with plugin authors and hosting companies and even search engines. Because one of our biggest struggles of being able to reach our users, right, because we don't have direct access to them, well, wherever it is that they host, their host probably has direct access to them. If they're buying premium plugins through any of these plugin companies, those people, they have access to them. People are using, Google Search Console or whatever it is that they're calling it now, right? So Google has direct access to a lot of our users. And we've been able to start pushing training materials and information out, helping build basically training tools that all of those people are now being able to use to help educate our users for us. We do a lot, and it's fun to get to share some of the lessons that we've learned, some of the missteps that we've had, and how we've gone about kind of trying to creatively solve some challenges. But one of the coolest things that I get to do when I come give these talks is see what everyone else is curious about. I get to share all kinds of stuff that hopefully are as interesting or more interesting to you than the stuff that I just handpicked myself. So I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions, which it looks like I have done. So, who's got questions? Yeah, right here.
You talked a lot about how your work allows you, compels you to bring things into what your team does. I'm curious about how you prioritize that and what it leads you to not, having to figure out what you need to find it.
The question is, with everything that's sort of being brought in, I'm talking about all these new challenges that our team is taking on. What do we end up not getting to do, and how do we prioritize accordingly? That's a challenging one that rests mostly on my shoulders, trying to decide what are kind of the most important things to chase after, where I think kind of the biggest wins are for us at the time. And also, a lot of what we do is try to come up with sort of a plan, figure some things out, and shift things off to other people too, right? For example, as we started building training materials to use in like curriculum, we now have a whole team that's dedicated in the WordPress project that's dedicated to making training materials and building curriculum, and we're now able to basically just kind of look at the security parts that they're doing and say, yes, this is good, no, this should be tweaked. And so a lot of these things are things that we kind of bring in, want to do, and then kind of go find the right people to do. It's not necessarily just our team that does them all, that's for sure. And great question. And yes, unfortunately, everything has to be prioritized somewhere. We do our best to put the most important stuff at the top. We're not always successful at that, but we do our best. Yeah, there was another question right here.
So as a WordPress user, it can be really hard to navigate all the plugins. And you talked about doing some scanning to look for active issues, but what are you doing to help guide users to maybe plugins that have maybe better assurance, better reliability than others?
Yeah, so the question is, there are tons and tons of WordPress plugins. Even for any one given thing that you're trying to do, there may be dozens or more that do that one thing. And as a user, it can be hard to find one that's trustworthy or secure. And so what are we doing to help users find a secure solution for that? That's still an ongoing process that we're constantly trying to work through. Some of that has been just trying to make there be fewer bad choices out there, right? We're constantly trying to improve every plugin across the board. But we're also trying to work now with the plugins team that sort of manages that directory and see if we can work toward putting some sort of trust score with plugins. We're still a little ways off from doing that. We're working in conjunction with Google on this with a project that we call Tide. Kind of the idea is raising the waters everywhere, right? Lifts all ships. So we're trying to use some of this technology that we've built with them to add in some additional security scans and give some sort of trust score. It's still a little ways off, but we are actively working towards that, I promise.
That's great.